I actually live on the East Coast, and my bedtime is at 9 o'clock. My East Coast time, 6 o'clock Pacific time is totally past my bedtime. And so I have friends of mine who've been joking. They've been offering me shots of espresso, shots of tequila, shots of anything so that I can stay awake. So I'm actually excited that I'm wide awake and wide-eyed and ready to go. And then I get to be here with all of you. So how many of us are familiar with just Azure in general? We've started kicking the tires. We kind of know a little bit about it. All right. How many of us are not really sure what Azure is, and we just want to learn a little bit more about it? The majority of us. Good. You're in the right spot. So this is Azure 101, I call it. And I really have to tell you that when I say 101, it's bare bones basics. It's what you need to know as a basic foundation to have a very high-level overview of it. We're not going to do deep dive technical because we only have an hour. So I'll kind of give you a couple of real-world scenarios on how you can actually use it. And just a quick check, how many of us are MSPs, VARs? Okay, all right. How many of us are hardcore server people now transitioning our business model to cloud? Okay, good. Because this part of this conversation that we're having tonight is, what is server in a cloud? What does that look like? And if we had to go that way, if our customers are beating down our doors saying, we want to go to the cloud, what does it look like? How do we get an enterprise scale option for very little cost? How can we still run as a small business on a shoestring budget as best as we can without having to have all of the hardcore infrastructure investment, but as MSPs still give us control of everything? That's what our conversation is tonight. That's what Azure 101 is, and that's what Azure can actually be for you. So it's really not, it takes it in a little bit different direction of 365. So just a quick check, how many of us are familiar with 365? Okay, so with 365, one of the challenges is it doesn't give you full server controls. Microsoft is still hosting it, correct? So some of us feel that we would rather go with an alternative platform because we want that control and we want to maintain as much as we can and we want to white label as much as we can for our customers. And when we start getting into Azure, Azure opens the door in a completely different way. We can white label it if we need to. We can build our networks the way that we want them. Yes, it's hosted for you, but it's the equivalent of going to an existing hoster that you might use today, like a Rackspace, for example. But it gives you an idea of being able to still build it the way you want it, run it the way you want it, and yes, everything is done in a cloud that, by the way, Microsoft is making available to you, but you still maintain that control. And that's the biggest difference that I'll tell you between Office 365 and Azure. The licensing is completely different. The control aspect is completely different. And oh, by the way, you own, as the partner, the support on it too. Because Microsoft will actually charge for support $30 a month. So it gives us a really good opportunity as MSPs and as IT service professionals to be able to have an opportunity in the cloud that we still feel like we can maintain control over. Sound good so far? Yeah? Okay. So this is your last hour of the night. So I know I'm excited, but hopefully you can be just as excited as I am as I go through this. So on our next slide, hopefully I can get there. Okay. So we're going into what is Azure. So Azure has 5 main components. First component, computing. Second component, storage. Third component, data. Fourth component, networking. And fifth is the app. And you can literally spend days in Azure. You can spend days in Azure understanding what Azure is. How many of us are familiar with Microsoft's SMB Live events? A couple of us. I'm seeing a couple of nods, yes. Here's the reason why I want to make sure to mention that now. Currently, there are 2 days of Microsoft Live events going on. One is devoted to Office 365. The other is devoted to Azure. So Azure is going to give you a deeper technical perspective in that one-day boot camp, and they're listed across the country in many major cities. So if you are not familiar with it, or you need a list of all of the SMB Live events that are going on, when you sign into the MPM portal as a Microsoft partner, just type in SMB Live. You'll get a full list search because, oh, by the way, that's on SharePoint. Get a full list of all of the SMB Live events, and you can register directly from that generic search. So, for example, I know the East Coast ones are coming up in the beginning of October, but there's still some central area and some West Coast areas available to take advantage of, too. And as a Microsoft partner, if you are a Microsoft partner, it's absolutely free as part of Microsoft's offerings for continuing education. So, Azure is what's called IaaS and PaaS. In other words, it's infrastructure as a service, but it's also platform as a service. And this I actually just took directly from the Azure website. But basically it says it is the only major cloud platform ranked by Gartner. Does anybody think that means anything? I have to double check. Some of us are yes, some of us are no. But anyway, it's an independent person that claimed they're great. But Gartner, as an industry leader for both infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, here's the piece on the second paragraph that makes more sense. This powerful combination of managed and unmanaged services lets you build, deploy, and manage applications any way you want for unmatched productivity. So the reason why it says any way you want is because you're going to find out when you start working with Azure, you can use an existing license or an existing VM, but then you can also use a standard template VM too. So it can actually be a build with a CAL included. And that's the best part about these things, because in traditional licensing, what we tend to do, we have the hardware itself, then we have the CAL that goes with the server, and then we have the end user CALs that sit on top of it. And now what we start to take a look at is, what options do we have? Even if we go to some of the hosting providers, we still have to have the CAL for the customer because, yes, it's in a virtual environment, but the CAL for the server still has to go with it. So what this is saying is let's break that mold. Let's actually have everything all built in one, charge one low price for a metered rate, and have that CAL built in. And you can go with a standard one, spin it up in less than 5 minutes, and you're ready to go. There's no 40 hours a week and planning ahead of time for building the server anymore. And that's the best part about it. From a customer perspective, that's where we get to offer these really large enterprise offerings at a really small shoestring budget, because you're really only paying the metered rate and the CAL is already part of the build. So you can still build on your own if you want and use the existing server CALs, and of course those are still extra. But the point is with this, if you want a template build so that you don't have to buy the hardware, buy the CAL, go through the hassle of installing everything and getting it deployed, in 5 minutes you flip a switch and it's completely done for you. It's just absolutely amazing the technology that they've started to build into this for us as partners to be able to have available to us. So on the next slide we talk about it's hybrid ready. So hybrid is Microsoft's big push for last year at World Partner Conference. And just to double check of hands, how many of us went to World Partner Conference? How many of us have ever been to World Partner Conference? Ever been? Ever, ever, ever? Okay. So a couple of us. So usually the big hurrah about World Partner Conference is the latest and greatest for what Microsoft is going to give you strategically on their products and platform services for the upcoming year. And so what we say here is that when we talk about hybrid, hybrid is we're still dealing with on-prem, but we're finding a way to include it in the cloud. So immediately, some of the things that come to mind are backup, right? Oh, let's back it up in the cloud, because if something goes down, we have alternative competitive options that are there today that we use, but we might be able to use this instead. Or we get into a scenario where changeover and progression of people that need to move to the cloud. We can't move them right away because they may be a little bit more than a company of 10. And how do we get them moved easily and seamlessly? Hybrid approach. What if you're going to run long term? Some of the ways that you set up and work with hybrid are meant for temporary only, not for a long-term strategy. This is a way that you can do it. So it gives us ways of being able to create a hybrid strategy, whether it's temporary, whether it's long-term, whether we're using Windows Server and we're backing up, for example, directly into Azure. That option is available for 2012 Server. But the point is that these options are available for us to be able to start to think about. What opportunities do we have to be able to utilize the cloud even in a hybrid scenario because the customer isn't ready, or we as a partner aren't ready to let go and allow everything to be in the cloud. We want to stage it out. Azure is open and flexible, and some of the things that I've listed here are some of the opportunities that we can use to connect. Windows, of course, Linux you've probably heard about in the media this past year. That was a big wow, shocker. Some of the other things that you're going to find in here are things like Oracle. That was a big wow, shocker too, that we were going to allow Oracle. And especially in the BI world now with dealing with SharePoint, that is amazing to be able to have. So we're also seeing the C# and the Java also included there as well. But the point is that Azure is designed to play nicely with others. And that was the point in building Azure to begin with. Not just focusing on the Microsoft stack and putting that in the cloud, but how do we deal with stuff like VMware? How do we deal with these other opportunities that we have to find a fit for them some way, somehow, and they've never fit before. So we have to still keep them in a silo, and we can't pull everything together. And now we can finally break beyond the barrier and finally have it available right here within Azure. My slide is thinking about moving. All right, so there are 4 main categories that Azure offers: infrastructure, apps, data, and something called identity. And I put AD in there because AKA Active Directory. So I'll go through of options, and then I'm just highlighting a couple of them because, like I said, we only have an hour, so I picked the most popular ones I think we would appreciate. So for example, underneath the infrastructure, and it gets kind of confusing if you've ever gone to the Azure website because it's everything you could ever want all in one place, and it seems a little bit overwhelming. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, there's an infrastructure category, and that infrastructure category is going to list all of these things. And sometimes we need a combination of them depending on what we're trying to do. So the point to this is you can do virtual machines with it. You can do a virtual network, and I'll actually talk about virtual network and virtual machines. Storage, backup, site recoveries, and then also options like big compute. All right, so on virtual machines, the great thing about this is you can actually have